I still remember the way Vanessa's voice sliced through the air that night. Her words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to leave me bleeding inside. "Eat quickly and leave," she said, setting a plate of cold pasta in front of me like I was an unwelcome guest at a cheap diner. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My hearing isn't perfect at 68, but I knew cruelty when I heard it. I turned to my son, Michael, my only child, the boy I once held in my arms through sleepless nights and ear infections, the man I thought would defend me if the world ever turned cold. He didn't look at me. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his phone, thumbs moving, jaw clenched. Not a word, not even a flicker of protest. The silence after Vanessa's command was louder than anything. I felt it pressing down on me, thick and suffocating, like hospital air before a code blue. I'd worked 40 years as a nurse. I knew how to hold my ground under pressure. But this wasn't an emergency room with patients and colleagues. This was my family, my son, my grandson's mother. And somehow, their cruelty cut deeper than any medical tragedy I had ever faced. I placed my lemon cookies, Ethan's favorites, on the counter. I had baked them with a kind of foolish hope, imagining the boy's smile when he saw them. But they sat there untouched, a cheerful yellow beacon in a kitchen that felt like ice. Vanessa's perfume filled the air, strong and artificial, drowning out the faint smell of reheated pasta. I tried to make small talk, my voice a fragile bridge over a canyon. "How's work been, Michael?" I asked. He shrugged without looking up. "Busy. And you, Vanessa? That's a beautiful dress." "It's new," she said flatly, her tone making me feel old and frumpy in my cardigan. Every answer was a wall. Every glance avoided was a reminder. I was not a guest of honor. I was an obligation, something to be ticked off a list before their real evening began. I forced myself to take a bite. The food was cold, tasteless. My throat worked hard to swallow, but it felt like ash. Across from me, Vanessa tapped her watch, loud enough for me to hear. My son flinched, just slightly, like a child caught doing something wrong, but still he said nothing. His silence was louder than Vanessa's contempt. I felt a tightness in my chest, the kind that used to make me rush for a stethoscope. But this wasn't a heart attack. This was heartbreak. My own son had chosen to protect his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. That betrayal stung worse than any words Vanessa could throw at me. Finally, I set my fork down with deliberate care. My hand didn't shake. 40 years of charting vitals had taught me steadiness. I stood, retrieved the untouched plate of cookies, and walked to the door. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't. What would I say? "Thank you for reminding me I no longer belong." The drive home was a blur of headlights and tears I refused to let fall. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, replaying it over and over. Vanessa's sneer, Michael's bowed head, the way my cookies sat ignored on their counter like a symbol of wasted love. When I stepped into my own house, the silence that usually welcomed me like an old friend felt different. It was heavy, accusing. The laughter of my late husband seemed further away. The walls that once carried Ethan's footsteps now felt like barriers keeping me apart from the people I loved most. That night, I made tea, my usual chamomile, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the cup until it went cold. For the first time, the house I had called my sanctuary felt like a cage. Not because of its walls, but because I realized how easily my own flesh and blood could make me feel disposable. I thought the humiliation at dinner was the end of the world. I didn't know it was only the beginning, because in the weeks to come, I would uncover something far darker than one cruel command, something that would show me the truth. To them, I wasn't Helen Carter, mother, grandmother, widow. I was just an asset. And that night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I had no idea I was about to become their greatest liability. The next morning, the sun poured through my curtains like it always did, but it felt different. It wasn't warm, it was accusing, almost mocking. I sat up slowly, rubbing my stiff knees, listening to the silence of the house. Some people imagine silence as peaceful, but when you've lived long enough, you realize there are different kinds of quiet. There's the quiet of a baby finally asleep, the quiet that feels like a blessing. There's the quiet of a late shift in a hospital, where every tick of the clock makes you hold your breath, praying the alarms don't go off. And then there's this quiet, the quiet of being unnecessary, the quiet of being erased. My husband's laughter used to fill this house. Sometimes I swear I can still hear it echoing in the den, the same way I can still see his hand reaching across the dinner table to squeeze mine when the day had been hard. He's been gone 10 years, but grief doesn't leave, it just changes shape. I shuffled into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stared at the counter where my lemon cookies had been sitting just hours ago. They were back home with me now, sealed in their container. I didn't even have the appetite to eat one. They looked like tiny golden reminders of my foolishness, of how I still tried to show up, to bring something sweet, to believe I mattered. I tried distracting myself the way I always do when pain digs its claws in. I cleaned the shelves. I straightened the magazines on the coffee table. I pulled weeds in the little garden out back. My hands knew the motions, but my heart wouldn't settle. Every time I tried to focus, Vanessa's voice slithered back into my head. Eat quickly and leave. It wasn't just a command, it was a verdict. She'd declared what I was worth in her eyes, nothing but an interruption. And Michael, my boy. The boy who used to squeeze my hand so tight when he crossed the street. The boy who once cried when he thought he'd lost me in the grocery store aisle. Now a grown man, a husband, a father, and he couldn't spare a single word for me. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one near the window, and stared at the framed photos on the mantel. Michael, as a teenager in his football uniform, me in my nurse's scrubs after a long shift, my husband with Ethan as a toddler on his shoulders. Each photo felt like a piece of a puzzle I no longer fit into. For a moment, anger bubbled up inside me, hot and unfamiliar. I wasn't raised to be angry. My parents taught me to keep the peace, to endure. In the hospital, I learned to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about saving a patient or diffusing a fight, it was about watching the people I loved most erase me like chalk on a board. I tried calling Ethan that afternoon, just to hear his voice. He didn't pick up. Maybe he was at soccer practice. Maybe Vanessa didn't let him answer. I left a message anyway. Hi honey, it's Grandma. I hope you're having a good day. I love you. My voice cracked on the last words, so I hung up quickly before I could sound pathetic. By evening, I'd convinced myself to let it go. Maybe Vanessa had been stressed. Maybe Michael had been tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. I've used that excuse 1,000 times in my life. Too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy. Women of my generation swallowed words like pills. But as I sat at my kitchen table, stirring a cup of tea I didn't even want, I realized something. Sensitivity isn't the problem. Disrespect is. The phone stayed silent all night. No text from Michael. No thank you for the cookies. No apology. Just silence. I curled up in bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles. My chest felt heavy, but somewhere deep inside, a different feeling stirred, small but undeniable. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was the first flicker of a question. How much more of this can I take? I thought the answer would come the next day. I didn't know the real answer wouldn't come until weeks later, when their lies would unravel in front of me, and I'd finally see who they really were. That night, though, I only had the silence. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a companion. It felt like a warning. The envelope never came. For weeks, I checked the mailbox with a strange mix of hope and dread, shuffling through bills, grocery flyers, and catalogs. Each time, my stomach clenched tighter. I told myself to be patient. Surely Michael and Vanessa would send me the details of Ethan's 8th grade graduation. I had already bought the gift, a leather-bound set of Ethan's favorite fantasy series. I wrapped it carefully in silver paper, tied it with a blue ribbon, and placed it on the sideboard. Every time I walked past it, I imagined his face lighting up when he tore it open. But the invitation never arrived. I tried not to think the worst. Maybe they were busy. Maybe the school hadn't finalized the schedule. Maybe I was worrying for nothing. But deep down, I knew. Mothers always know. After 2 weeks of waiting, I finally gave in and called Michael. When he answered, his voice sounded rushed, brittle. Hi, sweetheart, I said as lightly as I could. I just wanted to check, when is Ethan's graduation ceremony? I don't want to miss it. Silence. A pause, just a shade too long. Then he sighed. It's nothing big, Mom. Just a small thing in the school gym. We didn't want to bother you. Bother me. The words hit like a slap. Attending my grandson's graduation was a bother? My throat tightened, but I forced cheer into my voice. Oh, I see. Well, please tell him Grandma loves him and is so proud. When I hung up, my hand trembled. I stared at the phone, hearing his tone replay in my head. He was lying. I'd worked in hospitals for decades. I could hear the waver in someone's voice when they weren't telling the truth. My son had lied to me, and the weight of that truth pressed on my chest like a stone. 2 days later, the truth came knocking on my door in the form of Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor across the street. She bustled in carrying her tablet, her eyes bright. "Oh, Helen, you should have seen it," she exclaimed. The graduation was just beautiful balloons, music, the whole gym decorated. My granddaughter was radiant. She tapped her tablet with eager fingers. "Here, let me show you the pictures." I smiled politely, but my pulse roared in my ears. She handed me the tablet, and there it was. A sea of proud families, kids in pressed clothes, cameras flashing. I swiped, and my breath caught. Michael, smiling stiffly, his arm draped around Vanessa. Beside them stood her parents, glowing as if they owned the moment. And Ethan, my Ethan beaming, holding his certificate, standing with the people who had been invited, who had not been a bother. I was the only one missing. I handed the tablet back, murmuring something about how beautiful Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter looked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and far away. As soon as she left, I sank into my armchair. The silence of the house pressed against me again, heavier than before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a scheduling mix-up. It was a choice. Vanessa was cutting me out piece by piece, and Michael was handing her the scissors. I thought of Ethan's smile. His sweet face lit up with pride. I wasn't there to clap, to cheer, to hug him afterward. My chair in the bleachers had been empty, and they hadn't even cared. I pressed my palm against the wrapped book on the sideboard. The ribbon gleamed in the lamplight, mocking me. A gift with no occasion, a love with no place to land. That night I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea untouched in front of me. My heart ached, but beneath the ache, something colder began to grow. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was the dawning realization of war. They weren't just forgetting me, they were erasing me. And the cruelest part? I had let them. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I excused Michael's silence, every time I told myself I was being too sensitive, I handed them the eraser. But that night, for the first time, I felt a spark. Small, fragile, but alive. A question burned inside me. What would happen if I stopped letting them? I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything began to change. The call came just after dinner, when the house was quiet and I was knitting on the couch. My phone buzzed against the table, and Michael's name lit up the screen. For a split second, my heart leapt the way it always does when your only child reaches out. Maybe, I thought, he was calling to apologize about the graduation. Maybe he'd invite me over for coffee. Maybe he'd let me see Ethan. But hope is a dangerous thing. "Mom," Michael's voice rushed through the line, tight with panic. "I hate to ask you this, but we're in trouble." My stomach clenched. "What's wrong? Are you all okay?" He exhaled shakily. "The upstairs bathroom pipe burst while we were out. Water everywhere ruined the drywall, the ceiling's a mess. The plumber says it could cause mold if we don't fix it immediately." His words tumbled out like a man drowning. "It's thousands, Mom. The emergency estimate was 10,000. We just don't have that right now." I gripped the phone tighter. $10,000. That wasn't pocket change, it was half of my carefully built savings. The cushion I'd promised myself would keep me safe if my health ever failed. 10,000, I whispered. "Please, Mom," Michael said. "It's just until my next project pays out. You know I'll pay you back. You'd be saving Ethan's home." His voice cracked on my grandson's name, and I felt my heart twist. Vanessa's voice floated in faintly in the background, sharp and urgent. "Tell her it's critical. Tell her we'll lose the house if we don't fix it now." Michael returned to the line, softer. "Mom, please." All the instincts that had guided me through decades as a nurse surged up again, the need to fix, to help, to save. I could picture water pouring down their walls, Ethan's room ruined, his things destroyed. A grandmother's mind doesn't argue with logic in those moments. It moves straight to action. Before I could stop myself, I was at my desk, pulling out my checkbook. "I'll go to the bank first thing in the morning," I said. "You'll have the money." Michael's relief came in a rush. "Thank you, Mom. You don't know what this means. I promise this is just temporary." We hung up, and I sat there staring at the quiet room. My hand was still clutching the phone. Something inside me felt unsettled, but I pushed it away. "It's for family," I told myself. "You help. That's what mothers do." The next morning, the bank teller raised her brows when I explained the withdrawal. "Are you sure, Mrs. Carter?" she asked gently. "That's a lot to take out of your emergency fund." I smiled, though my cheeks burned. "It's for my son," I said firmly. "He needs it." The words sounded noble, almost rehearsed. I signed the slip with steady hands, ignoring the small voice inside me whispering that I might regret this. When the money was transferred, I called Michael to let him know. His gratitude sounded real enough. Vanessa even chimed in with a sugary, "Thank you, Helen, we'll never forget this." For the first time in weeks, I felt useful again, needed. A purpose stirred in me, soothing the ache from the graduation. Maybe this crisis would remind Michael that family was family, that a mother's love was something he could rely on. That night, I brewed myself tea with a lighter heart. I imagined Ethan sleeping soundly, his home safe, the water damage fixed because Grandma stepped in. I even allowed myself a fragile hope that Michael might stop by soon, maybe bring Ethan over with a thank you hug. But hope has sharp edges, because what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that there had been no burst pipe, no mold, no emergency. My $10,000 hadn't gone to save a home. It had gone to buy something far colder, far more selfish. And when I found out the truth, the betrayal would cut deeper than any command to eat quickly and leave. It was a Saturday morning when the truth slapped me across the face. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea and trying to shake off the heaviness of another restless night, when my tablet buzzed with a notification. I wasn't much for social media, but I kept an account just to see photos of Ethan. Most of the time, I had to hunt through Vanessa's posts, her dinners, her outfits, her inspirational quotes to catch a glimpse of my grandson. That morning, one photo froze me in place. Vanessa was sprawled across a gleaming outdoor sectional sofa, a glass of wine in her manicured hand. Behind her, a brand new fire pit glowed against the dusk. Matching chairs surrounded it like a scene pulled straight from a glossy lifestyle magazine. The caption read, "Backyard Oasis complete. Huge thanks to the best husband for making my dream come true. Cheers to many summer nights." My blood ran cold. The sofa, the fire pit, the set, it screamed money. Not a few $100s, not even 1,000. I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen those catalogs that came in the mail, circled those very sets with longing I'd never indulge. This was $10,000 worth of luxury, $10,000 I had handed over just days earlier. There was no burst pipe, no mold, no ruined drywall. There was only a lie. I stared at Vanessa's triumphant smile until my vision blurred. My teacup slipped in my hand, clattering onto the saucer. I pressed my palms flat against the table, my chest tight, as humiliation and fury flooded me in equal measure. They had used me, coldly, shamelessly. Not even a week after cutting me out of Ethan's graduation, they had spun a story, wrapped it in panic, and watched me rush to their rescue. My love had been their leverage. My savings had been their play money. For the rest of the day, I drifted through my house like a ghost. Every corner of the home I'd built with my husband seemed to echo back their betrayal. The oak staircase he polished by hand, the worn carpet where Ethan once played with toy trains. What would Michael and Vanessa see here? Not memories, not love, just dollar signs, collateral. I tried to eat lunch but pushed the food away after 2 bites. My stomach churned. In the afternoon, I wandered out to the garden. The roses needed trimming, weeds tugged at the soil, but I barely saw them. All I could see was Vanessa's smug face, glass raised high, toasting with my money. By evening, I was trembling not from age, not from fatigue, but from something deeper, a raw, cold anger. I wasn't a woman prone to rage. Decades as a nurse had taught me composure, patience, compassion, even in the face of chaos. But this was different. This wasn't life or death. This was cruelty by choice. When night fell, I sat in my armchair, the wrapped birthday gift for Ethan still on the sideboard. The silver ribbon gleamed in the lamplight. It felt mocking, like everything else. I thought of him, sweet Ethan, who still hugged me tight when we saw each other, who lit up when I brought his favorite cookies, He didn't know what his parents had done. But one day, if things kept going this way, he would. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think was this: if they could lie so easily about $10,000, what else were they plotting? Sleep didn't come easily that night. When it did, it brought restless dreams. Michael as a boy, begging me for help, only for Vanessa's voice to sneer in the background, "Eat quickly and leave." When I woke the next morning, the anger was still there, heavier now. And beneath it, something sharper, something dangerous. A thought I hadn't let myself form until that moment. They think I'm weak. They think I'll never fight back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like just a mother or a grandmother. I felt like a woman pushed too far. And women pushed too far are capable of things no one expects. The bitter truth had broken something inside me. But it had also lit a spark, and soon enough, that spark would turn into fire. The first week of June crept in with the heavy heat of summer, and with it came Ethan's birthday. 14 already. I could hardly believe it. I still remember the tiny bundle I held in the hospital, his fist curling around my finger with surprising strength. He had been my lifeline after my husband passed. Every laugh, every drawing he proudly showed me, every time he called me grandma with that innocent affection, it kept me tethered to hope. So even after the sting of being excluded from his graduation, even after the humiliation of learning what Michael and Vanessa had done with my $10,000, I couldn't abandon that boy. He was still my grandson. He still deserved my love. I decided to make him something from the heart. Not another book, not a gift card. Something that carried my hands, my time, my prayers. I bought thick yarn in deep navy and silver, the colors of his favorite baseball team, and began knitting a blanket. Every night, the needles clicked in a steady rhythm. Each stitch was a thought of Ethan. May you always be warm. May you always know you're loved. By the time his birthday came, the blanket was large and heavy, soft enough to wrap him in warmth for years. I folded it carefully, placed it in a box, wrapped it in bright blue paper, and tied it with a silver ribbon. The package was big, too big to leave sitting out on a porch. I knew I wouldn't be invited to the party, if there even was one. Still, I couldn't let the day pass without giving him the gift. I told myself I'd just drop it off, ring the bell, and leave. No confrontation. Just a grandmother's love delivered quietly. That Saturday morning, I drove across town, the gift resting on the seat beside me like a companion. Their street looked strangely still. No cars in the driveway. No balloons, no laughter spilling out the windows. Maybe they'd gone to lunch. I walked up to the door, balancing the box in my arms, and rang the bell. No answer. I waited, rang again. Still nothing. I didn't want to leave the gift outside, exposed to the sun or the chance of rain. On impulse, I tried the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned. The door swung open into silence. I froze, my heart pounding. It felt wrong to step inside without permission. But then I looked down at the blanket. Hours and hours of my love knitted into each row. I couldn't risk leaving it outside. Just the entryway table, I told myself. I'd set it down and go. I stepped in softly, the air-conditioned chill brushing my arms. The house smelled faintly of perfume and cleaning supplies, sterile, lifeless. I placed the box on the hall table, adjusting the ribbon so it looked neat. Then, as I turned to leave, my eyes caught a glow from the dining room. Michael's laptop sat open on the table, screen lit. I should have walked away. I should have ignored it. But from where I stood, one line of the email subject was clear: asset leveraging strategy. My breath caught. In an instant, I was no longer a grandmother sneaking out after leaving a present. I was a retired nurse who had spent decades documenting patient files, catching mistakes, and reading between the lines. The phrase was business language, cold, clinical, and terrifying. I stepped closer. My pulse hammered as words filled my vision. It was an email from Vanessa to a financial advisor. The bank is hesitant without more collateral. Michael will come around on the power of attorney with another push. She'll believe it's for her own good. Once we have control, the house is a goldmine. The old asset is our only way forward. I stared, the words searing into me. The old asset. That was me. Not Helen, not Mom, not Grandma. A thing, a resource. Something to be leveraged, controlled, liquidated. The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled as I backed away, careful not to touch the keyboard, careful not to disturb the scene. The brightly wrapped gift by the door mocked me a symbol of love for a family plotting my destruction. I walked out, closing the door quietly behind me. The box still sat on the hall table, gleaming in blue and silver, a monument to a grandmother who still cared for a boy whose parents had turned ruthless. By the time I reached my car, something inside me had shifted. The woman who drove there, carrying hope in a box, was gone. The woman gripping the steering wheel now was someone else. Someone who had seen the truth in black and white. I wasn't just unwanted. I was prey. And if they saw me as an asset to exploit, they were about to learn what happens when an asset decides to fight back. I drove home in a daze. The words from that email burned into my mind like acid. The old asset is our only way forward. I had been called many things in my 68 years: nurse, wife, mother, grandma, some kind, some unkind. But never had I been reduced to an asset. That was the language of bankers, brokers, and cold contracts. Not of the family, not of love. The drive passed in a blur of traffic lights and familiar streets I barely registered. When I pulled into my driveway, my hands clutched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. My house stood before me, quiet and solid. The same two-story structure where Michael had taken his first steps, where my husband had painted the nursery blue for a baby we hadn't even known the gender of yet. To me, it was a memory. To Vanessa and Michael, it was a gold mine. Inside, I sank into my armchair, my chest hollow. I tried to breathe, but each inhale felt shallow, like I was drowning in betrayal. I replayed every moment of the past year, every little cruelty, every lie through a new lens. The eat quickly and leave. The way Michael stared at his phone instead of meeting my eyes. The fake graduation excuse telling me it was just a small gym event. The desperate call about a burst pipe that never happened. And now, the $10,000 patio set is flaunted online. These hadn't been isolated moments of carelessness. They were tactics, a campaign, a slow, deliberate effort to wear me down, strip me of dignity, and push me into the role they needed me to play. A frail, pliable old woman who could be manipulated into signing papers. I walked into the kitchen and filled the kettle, my movements automatic. 40 years of night shifts had ingrained in me the comfort of routine. As the water boiled, I stood at the counter gripping the edges, staring at the familiar grain of the wood. This was the counter where Ethan once sat swinging his legs, eating the cookies I baked. Now, it was the counter where I faced the truth. My family no longer saw me as family. When the kettle whistled, I poured the water over chamomile, watching the steam curl upward like a ghost. My reflection in the tea was pale, but my eyes burned with something sharper than grief. For decades, I had taught myself to smooth things over. Nurses didn't get to panic. Mothers didn't get to lash out. We kept the peace. We endured. But there, staring into that cup, I knew endurance was no longer an option. They weren't just hurting my feelings, they were preparing to take everything I had built, every brick, every dollar, every shred of independence. I set the tea down, untouched, and walked to the heavy filing cabinet in the spare room. I hadn't opened it in years, not since retiring. Inside were folders, medical records I'd kept for reference, training manuals, even old shorthand notes. But in the back, I found the envelope that mattered. My house deed, my will, my financial papers. I pulled them out, laying them across the dining table. My will was old, written decades ago, leaving everything to Michael without condition. Back then, it had felt like love, trust, the natural order of things. Now, looking at it, it felt like a loaded weapon aimed directly at me, ready to be used the moment I stumbled. The word from that email echoed, collateral. My home, my safety net, was just collateral to them. My life's work was reduced to a line item on their balance sheet. I sank into a chair and pressed my palms together, thinking, they thought they were clever, but they had underestimated me. They saw a grandmother knitting blankets. They forgot I was also a woman who had spent 4 decades reading fine print, documenting everything, catching mistakes doctors and lawyers made when they thought no one was looking. They thought old asset meant weak, exploitable. They had no idea it meant seasoned, disciplined, and more resilient than either of them could imagine. That night, as the papers spread across my table, I felt a shift inside me. The grief was still there, deep as the ocean. But above it, rising to the surface, was clarity. Cold, steady, unshakable clarity. This wasn't about winning back their love. That was gone. This was about survival, about dignity, about showing them that the old asset wasn't something to be leveraged. It was something to be feared. I went to bed with a decision made. Tomorrow, I will begin to act. Quietly, carefully, methodically, just as I had always done in the hospital when a crisis broke out. The difference now was that the patient wasn't someone else. The patient was me. The morning after I uncovered the email, I woke with a different kind of heaviness. It wasn't the weight of grief anymore. It was the weight of decision. The sky outside was pale, the kind of gray that usually made me linger in bed. But that day I rose quickly. My body felt older than ever, stiff in the knees and sore in the back, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I brewed coffee instead of tea. It wasn't about comfort anymore, it was about alertness. I needed to think, and I needed clarity. As the machine hissed and filled the kitchen with its bitter scent, I leaned against the counter and remembered the nights in the hospital when everything went wrong at once. A patient coding, alarms screaming, staff shouting orders. In those moments, you either fell apart or you focused. My hands had never trembled back then. They wouldn't tremble now. I carried my mug into the dining room and looked again at the spread of papers from the night before. My life, reduced to folders and envelopes, the deed to the house, my old will, bank statements, proof of what I had built, and proof of what Michael and Vanessa were trying to take. For a long time, I stood there in silence. My reflection stared back from the glass frame of an old photograph on the wall, me, in my nurse's uniform, my arm around Michael as a boy, both of us grinning. I almost didn't recognize that younger woman, but her eyes reminded me of who I'd once been. Steady, disciplined, unafraid of blood or chaos. "Where did she go?" I whispered. The truth was, she hadn't gone anywhere. She'd just been buried under years of trying to be the good mother, the good mother-in-law, the one who smoothed over slights and swallowed pain. But that woman in the uniform hadn't vanished. She had only been waiting. I pulled out a notepad and began to write. Not feelings, facts. Every incident, every cruelty, every manipulation. I listed the dinner where Vanessa dismissed me like a stranger, the graduation I was lied out of, the $10,000 emergency. And now, the email. I wrote it all down with the precision of charting vitals. This wasn't a diary. This was documentation. When I looked at the list, the pattern was undeniable. They weren't just selfish. They were strategic. They were building a case, step by step, to paint me as irrelevant, maybe even unstable, to push me toward signing away my power. And if they were strategic, then I had to be more so. I went to the mirror before lunch, studying my face. Wrinkles mapped my cheeks, gray threaded through my hair, but my eyes were alive. I straightened my shoulders and practiced saying it out loud. I am not weak. I am not disposable. The words sounded strange at first, but with each repetition, my voice grew firmer. By the 5th time, I believed it. That afternoon, I walked through my house with new eyes. I touched the oak banister, the window seat where Ethan had once read his comic books, and the kitchen table scarred with years of family dinners. To me, these things were sacred. To them, they were resale features. But they had forgotten one thing. I wasn't just the caretaker of this house. I was its owner. And owners have power. I sat back at the table and took another sip of coffee. The bitterness didn't bother me. If anything, it steadied me. In the hospital, I used to say bitterness in coffee kept you awake through the long nights. Now, bitterness in life was keeping me awake in a different way. I knew what I had to do. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not hand them the emotional outburst they were waiting for. No, my answer would be cold and precise, hidden in documents and signatures they would never see coming until it was too late. By evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. My chest was still heavy, but underneath was steel. I looked again at that old photograph of myself in uniform and thought, she's back. She's not done yet. As I turned out the light and climbed the stairs to bed, a strange calm settled over me. The storm had begun, but I wasn't the one caught in it anymore. I was the one charting its course. Tomorrow, I will take the first real step, quietly, methodically, like a nurse preparing for surgery. They thought they were planning their future. They had no idea they had just awakened mine. The next morning, I cleared the dining table and stacked every piece of paper I had pulled from the filing cabinet. The wood groaned under the weight of decades: bank statements, tax returns, medical records, insurance policies, the deed to the house, my old will, yellowed with time. For years, these had been tucked away, ignored, except at tax season. Now they were weapons. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote one word on the cover: evidence. Inside, I began listing each offense like entries in a medical chart: precise, unemotional, documented. Dinner incident, Vanessa told me. Eat quickly and leave. Michael silent. Witness me. Graduation exclusion, Michael lied. Proof, Mrs. Thompson's photos with Vanessa's parents. $10,000. Emergency, money withdrawn June 3rd. Proof, bank slip. Outcome, patio furniture. Email evidence, phrase, old asset. Intent, obtain power of attorney, seize home as collateral. The list grew until the page was crowded with bullet points, each one a slice of betrayal. Seeing them all together made my chest ache, but it also made something else spark inside me. Anger had burned away into clarity. This wasn't just a dysfunctional family. This was a calculated scheme. I spent the next hours in the spare room, pulling more documents from the cabinet. My nursing career had trained me to be meticulous, to file every lab result, every patient chart. That discipline hadn't left me. Within days, I had assembled a binder divided by tabs: assets, liabilities, timeline, evidence. In assets, I listed my house, my modest savings account, now $10,000 lighter, and my small pension. In liabilities, I wrote only two names: Michael Carter and Vanessa Carter. Underneath, I added the words, "They are the true threat." The house was the crown jewel, I realized. Paid off decades ago, sitting on land whose value had only climbed. To me, it was home. To them, it was leverage. Every move they'd made, the exclusion, the lies, the humiliation, was a step toward prying it from my hands. At one point, I stopped, pressing my fingers to my temples. A wave of exhaustion swept over me. This was my son, my flesh and blood. How had we gotten here? A mother should never have to catalog her child as an adversary. But then I thought of Vanessa's email, the cold phrasing, the way she had written, "She won't suspect a thing," and Michael silent, complicit. My sorrow hardened into resolve again. That evening, I brewed tea and sat in the living room with my binder open on my lap. The house was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, punishing silence from before. It was the silence of preparation, of storm clouds gathering. I flipped to the timeline section and began mapping the escalation. Dinner command, dismissal. Graduation, exclusion. Burst pipe lie, financial theft. Email, plan exposed. It was a progression, each event more cruel than the last. They weren't improvising. They were testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push me before I broke. Well, I wasn't going to break. I thought back to my early days as a nurse. The first time I caught a doctor's error in a chart, he had dismissed me, said I was reading it wrong. I hadn't argued. I just pulled the records, showed him the numbers, and forced him to face the truth. Quiet, steady, unshakable. That was how you won battles, not by shouting, but by presenting facts so solid they couldn't be denied. I closed the binder and placed my hand on the cover. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was armor. Still, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood the legal battlefield the way I had once understood hospital wards. Someone sharp enough to anticipate their moves, steady enough to help me build a fortress. My mind flickered to a name I hadn't thought of in years: Grace Howard. We'd worked together once, back when she was just starting as a hospital legal advisor. Fierce, brilliant, unflinching. I'd heard she left medicine to practice estate law. If that was true, she was exactly who I needed. I stood and stretched, feeling my bones protest, but my spirit was stronger than it had been in years. Tomorrow, I will find her. For now, the binder sat on my table, a silent testament that the old asset had woken up, and once awakened, I wasn't going back to sleep. The following Monday, I dressed differently. No soft cardigan, no loose slacks. Instead, I pulled out the blazer I hadn't worn in years, a navy piece with firm shoulders that made me stand straighter. My hands shook slightly as I buttoned it, but not from weakness, from purpose. I had spent the weekend flipping through the old directory from my hospital days until I found her name, Grace Howard. Back then, she'd been a young legal advisor with eyes like steel and a brain that never missed a detail. Rumor was she'd gone into estate law after leaving the medical field. I prayed the rumor was true. When I called, the receptionist's calm voice answered, "Howard and Associates, how may I help you?" My chest tightened with relief. Grace was still practicing. I scheduled the earliest appointment they had. Now, walking into her office, I felt the same nerves I'd once felt before testifying in front of a hospital board. The reception area smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly arranged law books. It was a place of order, precision, exactly what I needed. When Grace stepped into the room, time fell away. Her hair was silver now, cut in a sleek bob, but her eyes were the same sharp gray I remembered. She shook my hand firmly, and for the first time in months, I felt seen not as a nuisance, not as an asset, but as a woman with weight and dignity. "Helen Carter," she said, studying me with that hawk-like gaze. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I replied. "Too long. I need your help." In her office, I laid the binder on her desk. My heart pounded as I opened it, tab by tab, explaining each section the way I used to present case notes during medical reviews. I didn't start with the humiliation or the heartbreak. I started with the facts. The house is paid off, valued at nearly $500,000. My savings are modest, my pension steady. But here, I slid the bank slip across the desk, is the $10,000 withdrawal. They told me it was for emergency plumbing. It wasn't. It bought furniture. I'm ecking. I handed her a printout of Vanessa's social media post. Grace's brow arched, but she didn't comment. Next, I recounted the dinner incident, the graduation exclusion, and the lies. Finally, I slid the sealed envelope across the polished wood. "This," I said, my voice tightening, "is the email I saw on my son's laptop." Grace opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the printed lines. "The old asset is our only way forward." Her jaw tightened, just slightly, before she set the paper down. "They've underestimated you," she said at last. Her tone wasn't pitying, it was clinical, decisive. "That's their first mistake. Their second was leaving a paper trail. What they've described as textbook financial exploitation. They're attempting to build a case for power of attorney." I swallowed. "Can they succeed?" "Not if we move first," she replied firmly. "Helen, you still control your estate. You can restructure everything to make it untouchable. An irrevocable trust for the house, a long-term care plan, and a revised will. Once these are in place, they'll have nothing to leverage." The words settled over me like a lifeline. Irrevocable, untouchable. For months I had felt cornered, stripped of power. Now I saw the path forward, a fortress built not of stone, but of signatures and legal clauses. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I just want peace. I want my home, my future, my dignity, protected." Grace nodded. "Then we'll protect them, and if your son or daughter-in-law tries to challenge you, we'll be ready." I exhaled slowly, my shoulders loosening. For the first time since Vanessa sneered at me over that cold plate of pasta, I felt steady again. As we scheduled the next steps, Grace leaned forward. "One thing, Helen, you mustn't confront them." "Not yet. Don't tip your hand. Let them believe you're still the passive mother they think you are." I smiled faintly. "I've been underestimated before. It won't be the last time. But this time, it'll work in my favor." When I walked out of the office, the sun felt brighter. My steps were firmer. In my purse, the binder no longer felt like a bundle of papers. It felt like a shield. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the battle. Grace wasted no time. Within days, she had arranged the documents, each one sharp and heavy with meaning. I sat in her office again, the mahogany table lay out like a surgeon's tray, trust agreements, insurance contracts, a freshly drafted will. The first paper she slid toward me was the irrevocable trust. "Once you sign this," she explained, "your house will no longer be in your name. It belongs to the trust, which you control during your lifetime. No one, your son, your daughter-in-law, or even the courts can touch it. I ran my hand over the thick paper. My house. The same one Michael and Vanessa called a gold mine. The place where my husband and I planted roses, where I bandaged scraped knees, where Ethan learned to read on the living room carpet. They wanted to strip it from me, but with one signature I would seal it away forever. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled for a second, then steadied. I signed my name with deliberate care. The ink sank deep, permanent. I felt a weight lift from my chest, the weight of their greedy eyes. Next came the insurance forms. Grace explained the strategy in her calm, clinical way. They'll try to argue for power of attorney, claiming you can't manage your care. This policy ensures you'll always have coverage on your terms. It takes their weapon away before they can raise it. The numbers made me pause. The premiums weren't small, but what was the price of freedom? I thought of Vanessa's smirk over that brand new patio set, bought with my $10,000. I refused to let them dictate the end of my life as well. I signed again. Finally, Grace placed the draft of my new will in front of me. The language was simple, airtight. My assets are secured for charity, and my house is entrusted to the literacy foundation I had once volunteered with. Children who had no one would learn to read because of me. That thought filled me with a quiet warmth. But Grace had included something else, small but sharp as a knife. To avoid a legal challenge, she said, you must acknowledge your son in the will, not much, just enough to show you considered him. I read the line carefully. To my son, Michael Carter, I leave the sum of $1 and the enclosed letter. Inside that letter was a single page, the printed copy of Vanessa's email, followed by one sentence in my own handwriting, this is why. My throat tightened as I read it. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was true. And truth was more devastating than rage. When I finished signing, Grace gathered the documents into a neat stack. It's done, she said, her voice firm. You are protected. I leaned back, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Protected. Such a simple word, but it felt like armor wrapping around me. That evening, I returned home with the folder in my bag. I set it gently on the kitchen counter and poured myself a cup of tea. This time, I didn't feel the heavy silence pressing down on me. Instead, the quiet was purposeful, like the pause before a symphony begins. I walked through my home slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the framed photos. They were no longer just memories, they were safe. The fortress wasn't built of bricks or steel. It was built of signatures, trust agreements, and the determination of a woman they thought was weak. As night fell, I sat by the window, watching the garden sway in the breeze. For the first time in months, I didn't worry about what Michael and Vanessa were plotting. Their plans, their schemes, it no longer mattered. The game had changed, and they didn't even know it yet. I sipped my tea and whispered into the dark, "Come at me now. I'm ready." The fortress stood, invisible but unbreakable, and within its walls, I finally felt peace. The storm broke sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, spam calls were constant, but something about the urgency in the preview made me open it. "Mrs. Carter, this is First Federal Bank. Please call us regarding your recent property records. Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Vanessa Carter, has listed your home as collateral for a business loan." My stomach tightened, though not with fear. Not anymore. I knew this day would come. Grace had told me it was only a matter of time before Vanessa tried to turn my house into her stepping stone. I didn't reply. Instead, I imagined the scene playing out at the bank. Vanessa, dressed in her so-called power suit, was sitting across from a weary loan officer, flashing that smile of entitlement. Michael was at her side, fidgeting with his tie, eyes darting around. They would have come in confident, papers in hand, sure of approval. I could hear the loan officer's voice, flat and polite. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but there's a problem with the collateral you've provided." Vanessa would lean forward, irritation sharp in her tone. "Problem? That property is free and clear. It's been in Helen Carter's name for decades." And then the fatal blow. According to public records, the property is no longer owned by Helen Carter. It was transferred 2 weeks ago into an irrevocable trust. Legally, it cannot be used as collateral. Oh, I almost smiled. imagining the blood draining from Vanessa's face. Michael's nervous cough, his whispered questions. I could picture them pulling out their phones, frantically searching the county clerk's website, only to find the document in black and white, the Helen Carter Irrevocable Trust, filed, stamped, untouchable. That evening my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my chest tighten. Michael. I let it buzz 4 times before answering. "Mom," he blurted, his voice shaky. "What's going on? We just came from the bank. They said you don't own the house anymore." They said, "Mom, please tell me this is a mistake." I stayed silent for a beat, savoring the reversal. Then, calmly, "There's no mistake, Michael. I've simply taken steps to protect my home and my future. It's the responsible thing to do at my age." His breathing hitched. "Protect? From who? From me? From your own family? That house is supposed to be mine. It's my inheritance. Vanessa and I were counting on it for—" He cut himself off, but it was too late. The truth spilled out in his panic. Before I could reply, Vanessa's voice screeched through the background. "Put her on speaker!" Then louder, aimed at me. "What did you do, Helen? Are you insane? You gave away our house to strangers?" "Our house," she'd said. The words sent a cold clarity through me. It had never been about me. Never about Michael. Not really. It was about what I owned, what they thought they deserved. "My house," I corrected softly. "And no, I didn't give it away. I placed it somewhere you'll never touch. My peace is protected now. My dignity is protected. And most importantly, my home is protected from you." Vanessa shrieked, a raw animal sound. Michael tried to recover, his tone turning pleading. "Mom, listen, we were trying to set up for Ethan's future. You don't understand. Vanessa's business—" "Stop." My voice cut through his excuses like a scalpel. "Don't use Ethan as a shield. This isn't about his future. This is about your greed." For a long moment, there was only their breathing, ragged with panic and rage. Then Vanessa spat. "This isn't over. We're coming over there right now." The line went dead. I set the phone gently on the table, my hand steady. My tea sat beside it, steam curling upward. The storm was coming to my doorstep, just as Grace said it would. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and whispered into the quiet, "Let them come." I didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes after Vanessa's threat, the crunch of tires tore across my driveway. A car door slammed, then another. Heavy footsteps pounded up my porch. My front door flew open so hard it struck the wall with a crack. I didn't move. I sat in my armchair, my teacup half empty on the table beside me. My house was calm, with warm light spilling across the rug. If they expected me to cower, they were mistaken. Vanessa stormed in first, her face blotched red, eyes wild. Michael followed, pale and sweating, like a man dragged into battle he didn't want to fight. "You conniving old woman!" Vanessa shrieked, fists clenched at her sides. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You gave our house away." Our house. The words again. Each time she said it, it stripped away the last layer of illusion. She had never seen me as anything but an obstacle between her and property lines. Michael raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Mom, please, just listen. You weren't thinking clearly. This is a huge mistake. We can call the lawyer and explain that you were confused. We'll fix it." Confused. The word stung, but only for a moment. I saw it for what it was. Their angle, their tactic. If they could paint me as senile, as unfit, they could pry back what I had just secured. I let their words wash over me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached down to the coffee table and picked up a single folded sheet of paper. I slid it across the wood until it rested in front of Michael. He frowned, hesitant. "What's this?" "Read it," I said quietly. He unfolded the page. His eyes scanned the lines, confusion flickering first, then horror as the recognition sank in. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Vanessa snatched the page from his trembling hands. Her eyes darted across the email she had written herself. The cold words about me. The old asset. The plan to secure power of attorney. Her fury dissolved into something far more devastating, the flat shock of exposure. The silence that followed was thick and merciless. I let it stretch, let them feel the weight of their own treachery staring back at them in black and white. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, low, and almost judicial. You were worried about the asset. Consider it handled. My home is protected. My future is secure. My peace is mine again. I rose from my chair, slow but steady, my back straighter than it had been in years. The discussion, I said firmly, is over. They had come here expecting a fight, a tearful breakdown. A confused old woman they could manipulate. Instead, they found a verdict. Vanessa's lips trembled, but no words came. Michael couldn't meet my eyes. The paper still shook in his hands, the proof of their betrayal undeniable. I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen. Behind me I heard nothing but their ragged breathing. The storm that had burst through my door now hung limp, defeated. After a long, heavy pause, footsteps shuffled. The door creaked open. Then, without another word, it clicked shut. I stood alone in my kitchen, the kettle still warm on the stove, the faint scent of chamomile in the air. My hands rested calmly on the counter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. I didn't feel disposable. I felt untouchable. Through the window, I watched their car back down the driveway. Vanessa's face was pale, set in tight fury. Michael's shoulders sagged, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. They looked less like victors storming a fortress, and more like children caught in a lie too big to escape. They had entered my home with rage. They left in silence. And silence was the clearest admission of defeat I could ever ask for. I walked back to the living room, lifted the incriminating email from the table, and slid it into my binder under the tab marked evidence. A neat record, a final note in the chart. The confrontation was over. And though my heart ached with the loss of the son I once knew, I felt something steadier rising beneath the sorrow. Victory. News in a neighborhood travels faster than the mail. Within weeks of that confrontation in my living room, whispers began to ripple through the cul-de-sac. Not from me, I had said nothing. I didn't need to. Life has a way of revealing the truth without help. The first sign came with the car. Michael and Vanessa had once paraded around in a gleaming black SUV, the kind of vehicle that screamed success even if it drained your bank account. One morning, while trimming my roses, I saw a different sight. Michael pulling into their driveway in a dented sedan at least 10 years old. He climbed out quickly, eyes down, shoulders slumped. The SUV was gone. Sold, I guess, to cover bills. The house could no longer be collateralized. A week later, Mrs. Thompson stopped me on the sidewalk, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you see Vanessa at the superstore?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Working the customer service desk, on a Friday night no less." I feigned surprise, but inside, my stomach twisted with a strange mix of sadness and grim satisfaction. Vanessa, who once bragged about her managerial position and expensive taste, is now scanning receipts under harsh fluorescent lights. Choices have consequences, I thought. The facade of their perfect home began to crack next. The lawn, once obsessively manicured, grew patchy. Weeds pushed through the flower beds. The backyard, the very one Vanessa had boasted about online with her brand new patio set, looked abandoned. A gray tarp sagged over the expensive furniture, rain pooling in the folds. The same $10,000 set that had been my humiliation was now a monument to their downfall, rotting in plain sight. I didn't gloat. Not exactly. But there was a quiet justice in watching their empire of lies collapse under its own weight. They had built their future on the assumption that I would remain passive, naive, endlessly giving. When I stopped, their foundation crumbled. Michael avoided me now. When our paths crossed, he'd duck his head, as if the sight of me reminded him of what he'd lost, or maybe of what he'd tried to steal. Vanessa, on the rare occasions I saw her, looked through me as though I were invisible. That suited me just fine. One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson lingered by my garden, shaking her head. "It's such a shame," she murmured. "They always wanted to keep up appearances, but you can't hide money troubles forever." I smiled faintly, clipping a rose. "Appearances don't pay the bills," I said. At night, sitting by my window with a cup of tea, I thought of Ethan. My heart ached for him most of all. He hadn't chosen this. He was just a boy caught in the crossfire of his parents' greed and my defense. I prayed he'd remember the warmth of the blanket I'd knitted, the sweetness of the cookies I baked, the steady love that had nothing to do with money or houses. Sometimes I caught glimpses of him in their yard, shoulders hunched, moving slower than a child should. Once, he glanced toward my window, almost as if searching for me. I lifted my hand in a small wave. He hesitated, then raised his own before Vanessa's voice yanked him inside. That moment alone was enough to remind me why I had fought so hard. By midsummer, their decline was undeniable. The SUV gone, the lawn unkempt, Vanessa working late shifts, Michael looking hollow-eyed. The whispers grew louder. Neighbors speculated, but no one knew the truth. Only I held the full story tucked neatly in my binder, locked away like my house itself. The old asset they had tried to leverage had become their undoing. And though I carried grief, for the son I had lost to greed, for the family dinners that would never be mended, I also carried something stronger: pride. I had protected what was mine. I had refused to be erased. As the sun dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the street, I whispered into the quiet, "You underestimated me." Oh, the fall of their facade wasn't a triumph I celebrated with noise or victory songs. It was a quiet justice, steady and unshakable. And in that quiet, I finally felt at peace. 6 months later, my house feels different. Not because the walls have changed, but because I have. There was a time when every creak of the floorboards reminded me of loneliness. Every photograph felt like a wound. Now, the same quiet hums with peace. I host a small book club once a month. Mrs. Thompson and a few other women come over, bringing pies and stories. We laugh in the very living room where Michael and Vanessa once screamed at me. That space, soaked in betrayal, has been cleansed by friendship and warmth. I've also started volunteering again at the Children's Literacy Center. Sitting in a circle of wide-eyed kids, reading them stories about dragons and heroes, I see in their faces the joy that once lit up Ethan's when he was small. Some call me Miss Helen, others just tug my sleeve for another story. None of them sees me as an asset. They see me as a person who shows up, who cares, who makes silly voices when the monsters roar. Now and then, my phone buzzes with a text from Michael. The words are polite, tentative. "We're struggling right now, can we talk?" Or, "Ethan asks about you." I read them, my heart pulling in 2 directions. But then I remember the email, the lies, the silence when I needed my son most. I remind myself, love cannot survive without respect. I delete the messages, quietly, without anger. The woman who once clung to crumbs of affection is gone. Do I miss Ethan? Every day. The ache never disappears, but I hold on to hope that one day, when he is old enough, he'll understand. He'll know his grandmother loved him enough to fight for her dignity, even if it meant losing what she once thought she couldn't live without. The roses in my garden bloom brighter now. Maybe it's the extra care. Maybe it's the way peace has seeped back into the soil. Each blossom feels like a reminder. Renewal is possible, even after the harshest seasons. I am not just surviving anymore. I am living. My home is secure, my future is my own, my dignity is intact. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let anyone reduce you to an asset. You are not collateral. You are not disposable. You are the architect of your own life. So if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe to this channel. Join this community of women and men who refuse to be silenced, who are reclaiming their voices, one story at a time. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience, justice, and hard-won peace. Because it is never too late to protect what matters. It is never too late to fight back. And it is never too late to begin again.